Hi, my name is Dominic Quagliozzi. I'm a visual and performance artist from Massachusetts. I'm here today in my studio talking about my work, which involves my lived experience with cystic fibrosis and my experience with lung transplant. I explore different aspects of disability and chronic illness, social relationships, and the domestication of illness. So I use a lot of materials that you can be found in the hospital, like hospital gowns, masks and gloves, IV bags, and also other materials that have a high sense of emotional energy. Things like moving blankets, mylar balloons that say get well soon. Like the ways that we interact with illness ourselves and our support systems. The way I got started making art was actually, uh, I don't know if it's cliche or not, but I was in the hospital. I was in my early teens, having been hospitalized very often for, a lot of CF lung exacerbations with cystic fibrosis. So I was spending a lot of time in the hospital, starting from when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And so art making was always a way that I used to pass time and relate to my experience with my body, which was already kind of this weird intimacy that I kind of felt what was going on, but I didn't intellectualize exactly what was happening. So art was a way of kind of processing that and a way for me to communicate what I was going through. And when I was in the hospital this one specific time in my early teens, I think maybe 14 or 15, I was watching PBS one afternoon. All my friends were at school. I was in the hospital, and Bob Ross came on the TV. And I just was like, oh, this is really interesting. And that's how I actually started painting. Before that, it was mostly just drawing and coloring. And so I asked my mom for some paint and some paper. And at the time, she brought oil paints with construction paper, which you find out very quickly the oil just kind of eats up the paper. So I was left with like basically a mess on my little side table that rolls across your lap. And so I had oil paint all over that, and the paper disintegrated over a few hours of trying to paint. But that's kind of how I started. Evolved that to starting to use canvas panels and things like that. But I would just follow along with what he was painting, and I really just started exploring the material itself, the paint and the color, and how you layer those colors. And that kind of got me started in this journey of trying to merge my lived experience with chronic illness and disability and art making. Yes, so throughout the years, I really wanted to explore those things that I was going through and put it into the work. So naturally, there is a wide range of emotion and intensity in the work. So, and that's one of the things that I talk about a lot with people that are viewing my work, because they can see a range of playfulness and humor, dark humor specifically, but also those moments of joy and inspiration. And then the other end of the spectrum, um, desperation and intensity, dealing with things like coughing up blood and how that in some ways can be very demoralizing. So, in the one specific piece I'm thinking about, I was in undergrad and I was getting ready to do my painting final for my minor. I was a sociology major with painting minor, and I started coughing up a tremendous amount of blood. So I had to go into the hospital for a period of time to figure out why that was, and so I missed my painting final. And when I came back, I got an extension to finish the project I was working on. But in the course of a couple of weeks, I completely changed what I was painting, and I made this painting called Laughing and Suffering. And it's like very dark and kind of ominous piece, but it was like an exploration into the disappointment that a chronic illness is. It's always the sense of disappointment is always kind of looming there. You're No matter how joyful or how high that experience can get, at the very next moment you could be coughing up blood. So this piece, laughing and suffering, kind of really that's one of the first pieces in my career, my art journey, that I really tried to start exploring those themes. Yeah, the idea of what my target audience is an interesting question that I actually think about often. For one, I would say my audience is myself, because I want to try to see how I synthesize the ideas, the combination of the concept and the materiality of what I'm thinking about. And it's just kind of for me to see how that manifests, right? So that's number one. But then number two, I think about other artists that are making work in the disability and chronic illness space, what they're doing, the conversations they're having. So I try to think about the dialogue, the work that I'm making in dialogue with their work, as a larger conversation that people can access and use. And then the third is like a larger general audience, where my style of art making is a way to find language to an experience that is very hard to put language to. And that's kind of why I use art. Because how do I express to someone what it's like to have failing lungs, or the fact that I miss out on things because I'm in the hospital? The 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 way in which I process, when I was younger, the fact that doctors were talking about life expectancy, and not thinking about making it to college, or not thinking about a career I'd have, and how do you process those kind of darker themes and darker concepts that are really hard to explain to someone in a way verbally. So for me, or through words, right, through writing or talking. And so the way I use art making and the audiences that I'm seeking out are ways to put new language, a combination of written, verbal, and visual language, or movement language, or sound, whatever it may be. Um, just trying to find the best visual way, um, artistic way to create these different conversations. One of the things that surprises me continually, it's not just one specific surprise, but this idea of um, following the medium in terms of what's going to create the most impactful way to present an idea. And that kind of started for me around the time I was getting listed for transplant in 2010, 11, 12. And my health was really declining pretty fast. Um, I was having more and more hospitalizations. And so that was the time my CF team started bringing up the idea of lung transplant. My health was getting my health was getting very debilitating, and the amount of support I needed was rising. So being physically unable to make larger paintings, or the physical rigor of my studio practice up until that point, creating paintings, you make the wood stretchers, you stretch the canvas, you gesso. It's pretty physically intensive, in terms of an art making process. And so I wasn't able to physically do that anymore. So but I, obviously still wanted to make art and still wanted to communicate the ideas I wanted to. And so the surprising notion of all of that was how I reacted to the limitations that my health was now providing me, and seeking other ways to make art. And that was kind of venturing into performance art and using my body firsthand, specifically to create the message or the artwork. And that kind of started to spread into recording videos to make video art, and things that not necessarily needed a live audience, but were more performative. So I started using my body in most of my work from about 2011 to 2016. That was my transplant years, I call it. It was the 3 years I was on the waiting list to the time in 2015 where I actually got my lung transplant, and then about a year after in the recovery. So I was doing a lot of performance and video artwork in that sense. But that, and the surprising aspect of that is because I always loved painting and drawing, and that's kind of how I grew up as an artist. And I think very much in two-dimensional painting language, and to translate those ideas into three-dimensional performance type spaces was really exciting for me, very interesting. And I think the work that came out of that period, like one specific one in 2013 called Vest Sessions, where I was thinking about these private moments of doing my treatments, the vest and the nebulizer and the hypertonic saline, where it was like I kind of removed myself from my public or semi-public life and into these private zones, and did the treatments by myself, and in isolation, like in people that have chronic illness, and especially like cystic fibrosis and things, we know this, like it's a very isolating disease, right? There's the 6 feet rule. You can't even spend time with other CF patients in person. And so this idea of private space, I wanted to challenge that. And so I brought my vest and the nebulizers into public space, and I did my vest treatments on a public sidewalk in Los Angeles. And so the vest sessions was one of the performances, along with Urban Light IV Pole, where I infused home IVs, tobramycin, in a public space at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, at this famous Urban Lights sculpture by Chris Burden, where I used one of the lights. It's this big, beautiful light. There's 200 or 260 light poles in an arranged space. And I turned one of those into an IV pole by infusing my medication there right on the sidewalk. And so those are some performances that kind of, those surprised me. And then, like, kind of opened up a new avenue to different ideas that I could synthesize. As when you're born with a chronic illness, a disease like cystic fibrosis, your identity is so tied up in that label, that thing, that issue. And so I think art for me, just on a very personal level, has been an exploration and an attempt to kind of forge my own identity that is not related to CF. And I know that sounds funny because most of the work I make is about chronic illness and cystic fibrosis. But like I mentioned in one of the other questions that we've been discussing, it's like it's a way for me to create my own language around the disease and how the disease impacts me specifically. So for me, it's like art is taking agency over something that a lot of times you don't have any choice in the matter. You don't have, I remember watching, I was 12 years old watching Sleepless in Seattle, and all of a sudden I coughed, and I was like very watery in my mouth, and I went to the bathroom and I spit into the trash, and it was just completely blood red, and my lungs were just hemorrhaging, like on a random night watching a movie with my family. And so like that's just an instance where you have no choice in the matter when the disease is going to decide to do what it's going to do. And so a lot of times for me, art was a way to reclaim and recapture specific instances where I could take control of something. I could decide the meaning on something, and I could share an experience or create community with myself and other people, viewers. And it was a way to a lot of times talk about CF, but not talk about CF. It was talk about art, or talk about what I was going through on art terms, on my own terms, rather than, a conversation that was being had without my input. So that's kind of where art stands for me. Yeah.